Hi, everyone. Very happy Hanukkah. It's very special to be here, and thank you for spending this time with me. And I hope that our time together will be fruitful and valuable. Today, Hanukkah experience, Hanukkah festivities have become one with the outdoor public menorah lightings. One of the things that I love to do as Hanukkah comes in is I look to try to connect with some of the live Hanukkah lightings. For example, I'm always blown away by the lighting at the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin. I mean, this was a place that not that long ago, I mean, Hitler stood, his name be erased, and spoke, and it was a Nazi stronghold, Berlin, and the Brandenburg Gate today, every single year, has a menorah lighting. People come and gather to light the Hanukkah in a place that just not long ago the the Jews would have been so scared to go to. I mean that menorah lighting is not lost on me. And there's so many others. There's always the national lighting in Washington, uh, in front of the White House, very powerful lighting. And throughout the world, it's just become a normal part of the Hanukkah experience. People who are traveling, they look, where is, the Chabad doing a public menorah lighting? And there you have, it could be an elderly Chabad rabbi, young Chabad rabbi getting up on a cherry picker, or if you're scared of heights like me, maybe you're just using a tiki torch and lighting a public menorah. But it wasn't that long ago that that was a very difficult thing to do. You see, for so many years, the feeling amongst especially the American Jewish community was that Jewish practice should be done on the inside. It should be done at home. Why are you why does everybody have to see your Judaism? Why do you have to have this public display? I mean, meanwhile, our few lights are nothing compared to other people's lights. And I mean, I don't have to tell you about lights this time of year. Yet a lot of Jews felt like, if you're going to do it at home. What are you starting to bother? Why are you putting it in the public sphere? And there's been a great fight for many, many years over the public menorahs, especially on public property, especially in the United States, where there's this division of church and state. And people felt like, if we start doing this, it's going to make a big stunk, it's going to make a big deal. And the Rebbe really, really felt that and spoke about this so strongly, that the menorah, that the story of Hanukkah is about the public sphere. It's about bringing light into the world. It's called Persume Nisa, spreading the miracle, spreading the light. And that's what it's all about. And I think there's no better way than to make a large menorah and to light that menorah in the public space. And there's so many stories. There, one of the first public menorahs was created by Rabbi Drizin in San Francisco with like one of the producers of the Rolling Stones. The two of them, and to this day, this is the same menorah that's used. And early in the late '60s and early '70s, there's so many stories. I'll tell you one particular story. In 1972, with Rabbi Leibel Alevsky, he arrives in Cleveland, and he decides to put up a public menorah in the public square in the central area of downtown Cleveland. It was owned by the municipality. And the Jewish Federation immediately declared that they were opposed to it. And this was very common. Again, the Jewish community at large, especially in the '70s, felt like, leave it to yourself. Just, if you want to be a Jew inside. And he received, Rabbi Alevsky receives a phone call from one of the largest Jewish philanthropists in Cleveland. His name was Irving Stone, telling him that the Jewish leaders of Cleveland were furious. It's funny that we're telling the story because today, like, I don't think you'll find very many Jews that won't say, "Wow, there it is. That's our public display of Judaism. There we are. How amazing is this? How special is this?" And many of them today, I mean, you have the great leaders of the world in different countries and in different cities. You have politicians that are always coming to these public menorah lightings. But at this time, people were upset. And to reiterate, many Jews felt that it was important not to violate the separation of church and state. Because if you want to demand that non-Jews do the same in public or in schools, so the Federation wanted him to remove the menorah and put it, if you're going to do it on private property, not on public property. Rabbi Alevsky told them that he couldn't make any decision without the Rebbe's approval. It's 1972. So he phones the Rebbe, phones the secretariat of the Rebbe, Rabbi Chadakov, who was the head of the secretariat, and he tells Rabbi Chadakov about the situation, that the Federation was very opposed, and they were putting immense pressure on Mr. Stone, this philanthropist, and what should he do? Rabbi Chadakov soon came back with an answer. And the answer was in Yiddish. The Rebbe said, "B'shum oifin nisht." Absolutely not. He told Rabbi Alevsky to explain to Mr. Stone that this was actually the right thing to do. Everybody went crazy. But that year, the menorah was lit in the public square. And in those years, public menorahs were very controversial. There were many great leaders in the Jewish community that were against it. And several places, even close to Cleveland, they made very strong oppositions to it. Pittsburgh, in Cincinnati, and it even actually reached the Supreme Court. And Chabad argued that there was nothing wrong with the public menorah. I mean, even in 1979, President Jimmy Carter participated in the public menorah lighting across from the White House on public property. I mean, could that have not been a better, kosher certification, so to speak? There was some kind of Iran, I think, deal going on at the time. I don't know the details of it offhand, but it was the only time he had left the White House during that whole thing to go and light the public menorah. It was an amazing, amazing moment. And the main arguments that people had, and this is what's very interesting to me, I think, and maybe you'll find this interesting as well. The main arguments were whether the menorah was a religious symbol. The Chabad rabbis, Chabad argued that it's a symbol of freedom, that it commemorates the Jewish victory over the Greek culture that was imposed upon them. The fact that it was used in religious ceremonies didn't turn it into a religious symbol. And actually, the court accepted this argument. And they permitted menorahs on public properties while indicating that it should be done in a way that expresses the message of freedom, which is very fair. In Cincinnati, they didn't give up. They decided to argue a new case. And despite the ruling of the Supreme Court, they opposed the menorah and that it had a right to do so. Chabad in Cincinnati argued that it contravenes the right of free speech, that the menorah in the public is a public expression, that every citizen has the right to do so. And it rolled around the court system for about 20 years. And in the end, the Supreme Court once again ruled that they do not have the right to prohibit the menorah on public property. And people always ask us, even here at Chabad and DG, like, why do you have a menorah in front of the building? Why is a menorah your symbol? And I think that our logo is a menorah. And I think the menorah really becomes that real symbol of Judaism. Hanukkah is a fascinating holiday. I always say that if the holiday was called Chum Chum and it was about, I don't know, spitting wooden nickels on your head, and it was this time of year, it probably would be popular because it just happens to be in the right neighborhood with a lot of other holidays. It's just the reality. It's a reality. It doesn't matter what the holiday is. But it happens to be that I think that Hanukkah is the greatest holiday. The story of Hanukkah is the story of the Assyrian Greeks who tried to impose Greek culture, to prohibit Judaism, to ban circumcision, to ban Shabbat. And the Maccabees rebelled against them and won. See, there were other times in Jewish history that they tried to kill the Jews. This wasn't the Greeks trying to kill the Jews, but rather the Greeks trying to kill Judaism. Greek culture was the civilization of the day. The greatest scientific achievements came from Greece. They were considered the most progressive people in the world. Today, what do we have left? We have Greek salad, feta cheese. We have the Olympics, the horoscope. I mean, there's so many things. Well, Aristotle, philosophers. What our modern world, there's so many things that came from that world. The World Cup, right? It was based on, the Olympics was based, even the Olympics came from Olympia in Greece. And in many progressive countries, the local Jews, all they wanted throughout Jewish history was to become part of the local society. And in the days of the Maccabees, there were many Jews who held Greek culture in high esteem, and they deeply wanted to be part of it. Many of these Jews felt that the more we become Greek, the nicer they're going to be to the people. And the more we become assimilated into society, the nicer they're going to be to us. And this became the trend. And throughout Jewish history, this has been the trend. At the time, many Jews adopted Hellenist culture. They adopted the language, the customs. And it was especially prevalent among the families of the Kohanim, of the priests, even the high priests. Many Jews, especially the elites, became dedicated Hellenists. And they went through great lengths to prove their association with Hellenism. And this is not unique to this time. There were other times in history, but Jews just wanted to just treat us like everybody else. Why do you have to make us special and unique? It was not always easy. The Greek culture idealized the human body. The sports tournaments were completely naked. The Jews who wanted to participate they were afraid that people would see their circumcision. So many of them during that time, just to give you an idea, they went through a painful technique to hide the fact that they were circumcised. And that's how far the Jews went to be accepted into the Hellenist society. This is actually the reason that Maimonides rules that someone who hides their circumcision, whatever that means, has no place in the world to come. Because of this, because of the Hellenists. Well, this gave rise to the Maccabean revolt. Committed Jews felt so demoralized that the Maccabees were finally inspired to rise up, to bring back Jewish dignity, to bring back Jewish pride, to bring back a feeling of what it means to be Jewish. And that's the story that continues till today. It's not only then, it's today too. There's always this debate. Do we become one with the people? Just hide, just stay low, stay low. We don't need to be in the news all the time. We don't have to be the headlines. But the menorah, the story of Hanukkah, I'll tell you what's amazing about Jewish holidays. I don't know why no one talks about this. I think it's one of the most incredible things about the idea of Jewish holidays. There's this in our culture today. There's a conversation about appropriation and misappropriation. If you look at the Jewish holidays, you're going to see that each and every one of the holidays were created by the people who went through and experienced that. I'll give you an example. Passover. Passover commemorates the Exodus from Egypt. The Jewish people left Egypt in the year 2448. When did the first Passover happen? The Torah says in the year 2449. So 1 year later, they were still traveling. They were still in the middle of the story, but they stopped to commemorate Passover. And the Pesach, Matzah, Maror, a lot of the Seder that we do today was created by the people who experienced the story. It wasn't 100 years later, 200 years later, 400 years later, 1,000 years later. It was the people who experienced it. Purim, Mordechai and Esther. A year later, after the story of Purim, they sat down, they wrote the Megillah, and they said, this is how we are going to experience Purim. And from then on, every single year, no matter where we were, this is how we did Purim. The same thing with Hanukkah. Hanukkah was created by the people who experienced it. You know, there's so many parts of the story. The story went on for many, many years. There's so many parts of the story they could have said, this is the story. But they decided that it's the menorah, that it's the Chanukiah, that it's the light. They decided it. And we, unbroken, no matter where we've been throughout Jewish history, whether it's been through pogroms, through persecution, whether it was in 1492 in Spain, whether it was in the Holocaust in Auschwitz, we went to find the light so we can light the first night of Hanukkah. We relive the story. We relive the experience the way the people who experienced it the first time lived it. And I think there's not enough conversation about this. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. Now, I want to connect all of this with Joseph. You know, I love the story of Joseph. I want to just change topics for a second to connect the story of Hanukkah and everything I'm talking about with Joseph. Do you know where Moses is buried? No one knows exactly where Moses is buried. But he's buried somewhere on the east side of the Jordan River, where the Jewish people were encamped before they entered the land of Israel. Now, Joseph, we're reading the story. Next week, we're going to read the story of his passing. The end of the story of Joseph is going to be next week. Where is Joseph buried? He's buried in Shechem, in Israel. Actually, just like 2 weeks ago, there was a terrible, some people got hurt going to visit Joseph's tomb. It's not exactly in the safest place right now. It's somewhat bizarre. Joseph died in Egypt. He was buried there hundreds of years before the Jewish people left Egypt. But before leaving Egypt, Moses made sure to find his casket and to bring it along for all those 40 years in the desert, and then to have it buried in Israel. Moses, on the other hand, died at the gates of the promised land. Why couldn't he just say to them, bring me in? They were carrying Joseph's bones for 40 years. They couldn't take Moses' bones and bury him in Jerusalem, in Mount of Olives. That would have been a nice place. We can go visit Moses and pray by his grave. Today, we don't even know where to pray. So why was Joseph brought into the land of Israel while Moses, the great redeemer of Israel himself, was left in the diaspora? It's a question I've asked myself a number of times. I don't know if maybe I'm asking a question that you never asked, or maybe it's something that's interesting to you. So there's an interesting answer that's found in this past week's Torah portion. In the beginning of the reading, we read about Pharaoh's dreams about the 7 fat cows and the 7 skinny cows. And Pharaoh understood that he was being given a message, and he couldn't figure it out until someone remembered that there was, and the Torah says, a Hebrew lad languishing in prison who knew how to interpret dreams. The Midrash says something fascinating. It says, he who identifies himself by his land was buried in his land. And he who did not identify himself by his land was not buried in his land. Joseph. Joseph had every reason to victimize himself. Every reason. Sold to death by his brothers, who knew where he went. Had no reason. Those people, they sold me. What do I need to be part of them for? Yet, throughout his entire life, even though he was disconnected, he always identified himself with the Hebrews, with the land, with Israel. The verse says, I was stolen from the land of the Hebrews. And the Midrash says, and that's why he was buried in the land of the Hebrews. Moses, on the other hand, also had an opportunity to identify himself as a Hebrew. When he arrives in Midian to escape Pharaoh's wrath, and he meets Jethro's daughters, he came home and told their father, what did they say? They didn't say they met a Hebrew. They said they met an Egyptian, which means Moses had introduced himself as an Egyptian. And the Medrash says, Moses, who did not identify with his land, was not buried in his land. I think if you look at Hanukkah, the Hellenist story, and you look at Joseph and Moses, I think there's a very powerful lesson. Something that this year has hit us more than ever before. It's unbelievable for me to see so many people who are identifying with Judaism, who are identifying with the Jewish people, who are supporting their tradition and supporting the tradition of their neighbors. It's a beautiful thing. I'm always mind blown because throughout Jewish history, in times that were good and times that were peaceful, the Jews voted with their feet and they walked away. And today, we're seeing this dissonance in real life. This is the message of Joseph. Be proud of who you are. Loud and proud. Take the menorah into the streets. Take the light into the streets. My gosh, the world is darker than ever. And that's why the world needs your light. The message of Hanukkah is exactly what we need right now. We have to make sure that we are loud and proud, that we know who we are and we don't back down, that we're Maccabees, that we're Josephs, that we're not embarrassed of who we are. We're not hiding who we are. There's nothing to hide. There's nothing to be afraid of. And the fact that we see so many people, so many friends who are embracing it, identifying with it, and they're proud of it, that's how we know that there's no Maccabee museum. You know, they could have taken that jar of oil and put it in the museum. And then what would we have? You know, there was a pogrom in Kishinev in 1903. Do you know anything about it? Yeah, there's probably a monument somewhere near Kishinev. That's about it. But what do we have today? They use the oil, and the miracle happened. And here we have real live Jews who are today experiencing the miracle the same way they did. That's the secret. That's the beauty. That's the magic. When we do it, and we do it loud, and we do it proud, Hashem should bless each and every one of you. But as difficult as it is, when you have those moments, you can very easily say, I don't know, the Jews went that way. I'm an American. I'm a Canadian. I'm an Australian. I'm English. I'm French. I'm German. You could say, I don't know what you're talking about. Or you can say, these are my people. And this is my story, and I'm sticking to it. And Hashem should bless each and every one of you with that power, with that faith, with that resilience, and with that Hashem should see. And here we are. There's no reason for us to do this after everything we've been through, but we are, and we're loud, and we're proud. And Hashem should see that, and Hashem should bring us the absolute peace. We're to see our light connected with all the other lights all over the world, bring the ultimate light, the era of peace and tranquility to this beautiful world. I wish you a wonderful day.